Good morning, everyone. My name is Tomás Ancelovici. I'm the global lead for the Accenture Alliance here at Apttus. We have a very strong partnership with Accenture. They are one of our top sponsors this year, and we're very happy to be partnering with them at Hearst, and more specifically, Fitch Ratings, where contract management in any type of financial institution, as you all may know, is a very important aspect of any type of business, specifically within the finance world in terms of managing risks and compliance with authorities across the world. And as there's a lot of legal changes going on right now in the world, companies need to be able to have a lot of information on hand quite quickly, whether it's for authorities or other entities that are requesting information. And I think today you get a very good idea in terms of how Apttus and Accenture have been working with Fitch on their global contract management. So today we have Gautam Mehra, who is part of Accenture. He's been working with Apttus for over 8 years. I think he's one of our top Apttus experts outside of Apttus, and I'm personally very happy that he is part of Accenture, our top partner, of course. And we have Ranjit Prithviraj. Is that okay? Great. Who's got 20 years of technology consulting and has been with Fitch for the past 5 years, also doing technology consulting for the broader Hearst group. And they'll be talking about, again, the contract lifecycle journey of Fitch. So without further ado, and one last thing. I asked them for one fun fact, and they both mentioned the same thing. So it turns out they both like scotch and cigars, and that's how they've bonded.
Apparently, we should be married too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
We have the same likes.
I guess that has really helped and turned into a pretty successful rollout, and Fitch is a happy live customer. So
Thanks,
without
man.
further ado,
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is San Francisco people. I'm not judging.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Great. First of all, thank you for coming, and good morning. Can I hear a good morning? Can I hear a hell yeah? Can I hear anything? Yeah. Thanks for waking up and coming to this exciting session. Personally, I think I'm going to put some sunglasses on because the lights are bothering me. And it was really an excuse because there was the party, there was the after party last night, and then there was the after party. So believe me, this is better for you as it is for me. So what we're here to talk about is this exciting topic of, that was me before the project started. Look at me now, right? 100 pounds more.
This is after.
This is the after. A lot of scotch, a lot of cigars. And trust me, we needed that on this project. We couldn't have gotten through without that. For those of you that don't know us, what is Fitch Ratings? As you can see, it's a fairly long, dry slide, but what we are is really the Experian and the Equifax for companies and countries. Very simple. I wish we'd put that on the tagline rather than all that stuff, but that's what we do. And why did we go on this journey of CLM? To say that, I want to give you a little bit of context. First, we're a little over 100 years as a company. And when I'd say that in New York or San Francisco, people would be like, oh, wow, you guys are over 100 years old. But when you come to these conferences and you see all the companies that are like Huntsman and others that are 100, 140, 150, I'm like, wow, we're not that old. But with being a company with that longevity gives you a lot of old practices and a lot of staid and stoic ways of doing things. And my job, which I enjoy at Fitch thoroughly, is to try and drag us, kicking and screaming, into possibly the 20th century. I mean, 21st is a stretch, but at least to the 20th. And what we do is look at our technology, our applications, our processes, look at everything, and see how can we make it as frictionless as possible as we go into this digital age. So before this conference and before a couple of conferences, when everybody talked digitization and digitalization. Wow, was that me?
No.
Or is that chirping in my head, or is that really happening?
No, it's actually happening. You are not hallucinating yet.
Good. I should have stopped at that last drink, but anyway. So while we're trying to go down that journey, I feel like we had to look at our processes and say, look at our revenue processes and our contracts, because those are the most critical ones that build out from there. Couple of housekeeping rules also. On your headphones, if you're too loud or you have a lot of background noise, you can turn the volume off or on a little bit. Helps. Yesterday when we were listening to Danielle's session, I had like multiple voices on that headphone, and that's one of my feedbacks to the Apttus guys is either I'm schizophrenic or it's really happening. So anyway, that's the theme today apparently. Some of the challenges we faced is we're a heavy regulated industry, may or may not be applicable to you guys. But apologize, before we get started, I'd like to do the obligatory poll. How many of you are already using Apttus today? How many of you are using CLM today? And how many of you are thinking about Apttus that have neither CPQ or CLM? Good, so you're outnumbered, but great. So that just sort of gives me a level set on how much we talk about this stuff. And after the meeting, after the session, obviously we'll be here if you want to talk a little bit more. A couple of things that we had is that led us to the CLM path. One, regulations, heavy regulations in our industry. And every time ESMA or SEC or anybody asks us for something, our guys would go in full panic mode. Oh, let's find John. He has stuff on his laptop. I know he had it from like 10 years ago, or somebody had it in an Excel sheet somewhere. And so it was like this mad panic rush to try and get stuff from all these different systems and computers and laptops and hard drives. So it was really hard to get stuff together to give back to them in a way. And then that's real for our business because you could get pretty heavily fined if you don't have the data that they're asking for. Secondly, I say this without shame, we were 100% paper-based for our contracts, 100%. And that's not good in today's day and age to be that heavily dependent on paper and manual processes. Third, approvals was there. I'd like to say it was a little more stringent than being, but then it's a manual process, so you really can't measure or monitor that. You went at best efforts. And then finally, as any country, we're global. We're in about 40 countries with operations in all those countries and different languages. So that was sort of the background or what our environment looked like before we started with Apttus and CLM. I'm going to turn it over to Gautam to talk a little bit about the challenges slide. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so apart from the business side that Ranjit just talked about.
Otherwise,
right?
he'd fall asleep, so I
Yeah.
just want to make sure he talks as well.
Yeah, same yesterday night problem. Yeah. But anyway, so apart from the business challenges we had, right? So on the technical end, right? So we talk about the word ecosystem in a very positive way. Well, the Fitch ecosystem was actually on the negative side. I mean, because if you look at just the sheer number of tools and applications,
Yeah,
and
thanks for bashing your customer, man.
Sorry. And the way data would flow from one step to the other, right? It was kind of all over the place. You had multiple tools, multiple applications. As Ranjit talked, there's 100% paper-based, contracts being generated. So it was all Microsoft Word-based, Microsoft Excel-based. Right from how they quote the different fees and the quotes that go out to the customers for Fitch, as well as the actual legal contracts off of which the SEC and the ESMA actually do the audits, right? They were all Microsoft-based tools, and the kind of, I don't call it cherry on the cake, but the worst part of that was that between the systems, for me to be able to start from Salesforce to actually be able to print out a contract and send it out to the customer, it was a multi-step process, all manually done, right? I had to literally push manually the data, the documents, the fees and the quotes and the approvals all manually through one system to the other, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the ERP also a little bit later in the slides. But ERP was a whole different animal, right, when we talk about integrations, because that's where most of the financial data comes in, and that's where most of the auditing happens. So that was another layer of complexity that got added, given just how the ERP was set up with multiple legacy tools and systems in place. So those were the big challenge on the technical side as well.
Thanks, Gautam. Yeah, and we'll do this tag teaming a lot during this session, so just so that he makes sure I'm not sleeping and I make sure he's not falling asleep. One of the interesting points here is when we started to pick Apttus, why did we pick Apttus? We looked at other companies out there. And for those of you that are looking, there's other companies that do contract management or contract lifecycle management or document repository management, whatever you want to call that. And there's a little bit of a FUD factor in there, fear, uncertainty, and doubt when we looked at these companies throw in. As an example, one of the companies that I shall not name said, oh, you wanted a CLM? No problem, 2 weeks and you're up and running. I was like, really? For a company that's 100 years old that has so much paper-based documentation, it's in 40 countries with we like to think, fairly complex contracting processes, and in 2 weeks I can be up and running? Oh yeah, and you don't even need consulting help. You can just do it yourself. Just download stuff and you can point and click like a wizard and you're up and running. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is Apttus, which came in and said, oh, you really need a Rolls Royce. This is great. This is going to drive really well. So it's important to really understand where you fit in that journey. And I'm not knocking the other companies, because maybe your company is good enough for a 2-week implementation and you're up and running. Maybe you are. But we certainly weren't. And the way to figure that out, I feel, is first look internally, obviously, right? Do you have the expertise to implement Apttus? Have you done this 100 times before? Do you have the accelerators, the tools, the templates? If the answer is no, no, and no, then I would very much suggest going to an external consulting partner. Whether it's Apttus themselves or a consulting partner, doesn't matter. It's important to go out there and look. And what Accenture did for us was, and the other thing I would suggest very strongly is to do an assessment. These assessments typically cost a little money. If somebody says, I'll do it to you for free, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I've learned that the hard way. Do an assessment where they will walk you through, or you sit with them collaboratively and go through what business problem am I trying to solve, what's my ROI look like, and what would be the best tool for me, and most importantly, what is the culture that I'm going to be implementing into. So those 4 items you got to really think about and do an assessment and say, okay, I think Apttus is the right tool for me. How long is it going to take for me to implement it? And that's a really interesting question. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 2 years? Or is the answer somewhere in the middle? And that's what the initial consulting we did with Accenture on the assessment that really helped us sort of frame that question and build an ROI model. The other point I would mention on ROI is Apttus themselves have an amazing ROI calculator, which you can engage with them on, and they did an ROI study for us, and that was super helpful as well. So once that's out of the way, then you go in and start, obviously, with your implementation. And the 2 other points I'd mention here before we move to the next slide is really training, which is very, very important. We went with a tool called WalkMe, which sort of sits on the Apttus GUI, or Salesforce GUI, and it's there for people that are casual users. So people who maybe do a contract now and then do a contract like 6 weeks later, and they're like, how do I do this again? So that sort of walks them through that step by step. Now, if you have a separate contracting organization and all they do is bang out contracts all day, all night, you probably don't need training, because you'll get that. But if your people are not starting up contracts every day, then you probably need to look at this tool. And then finally is you just can't implement Apttus as a standalone and just leave it there. Because you have other systems at the back end. You may have financial systems, you may have ERP systems, you have other systems, and you really have to think about the end-to-end, that once you start the quoting, the contracting process, does it stop? Or do you then feed that into your downstream systems, which are your billing systems and others? And that was really our plan and our vision, was to go end-to-end with Apttus and to create, so if a salesperson, in theory, my utopian vision for Fitch is if you start with a quote in Salesforce, that should ripple all the way into contracts and into billing back into the back-end system, and ideally nobody should be able to touch that. I say ideally because we're not in an ideal world. And stuff happens along the way, but that's the hope and that's the plan. Am I going back or am I going forward?
No, you're going back. No. You were right. You go back. Go back.
Go back? You want me to go back?
Yeah. Go back one more. There we go. That's the new world.
That's the new world? That's where we are now, right?
Yeah.
So you start with I actually jumped ahead, so sorry. So we start with Salesforce, which is our CRM of record, where we have the customer opportunities, et cetera, which then feeds into the quoting system and then contracts, and then we have the whole fee capture and the billing to the downstream systems. So I'm not going to repeat that. This is one interesting, seamless integration from the front to the end. If for those of you that are interested, the money slides comes at the end. So if you want to leave ahead, then catch me later because the money slide really is in the end. What were some of the benefits for us? Was obviously we had a whole bunch of silos. We had even within the sales team, we had people that were in silos. We had silos in the finance department. We had silos in the legal department. So someone that wanted to get a contract done had to go to all these different places to get approvals and stuff done, which we sort of broke with this process. So there's an automated workflow that goes. If you're trying to be overly generous to your customers and quote over 40-50%, it goes to automatic approvals to the sales management. From there it goes to product management. From there it goes to legal. From there it goes to finance if it needs to, and then it comes back. So all that is a seamless process that was broken and fixed in a flat line. The checks were super important because we wanted to make sure that there were no quotes or there were no prices going out to our customer that wasn't pre-approved. And most importantly, it was being visible and being proactive rather than being reactive. What were some of the ROIs that we thought about? First and foremost was hitting the discount approvals up front. I have a phrase I like to use is asking for permission as opposed to asking for forgiveness. And a lot of companies I see do that, where if you're putting your controls towards the end and your pricing has already gone out to your customer, that's too late. So you're asking for forgiveness after, which looks bad on everybody. So you want to hit that approval process up front and focus on getting permission before you get forgiveness. The second thing was compliance. We have a huge compliance department, that's obvious. And they got very comfortable with this process. In fact, when we started this project, we had key stakeholders as the executive commit team on this project. And one of our key stakeholders was the legal department. The biggest one was compliance, because compliance was the one that was driving this project, saying, listen, we need to make sure you have all these approvals, you need to have firewall checks and sanction checks and all these things in place before you even get to a contract. And then the contracting process flows through. And lastly, we wanted to go from 100% paper to 0% paper. That's, again, very utopian, but I think we're sort of getting there. I really track adoption rates really carefully because that's super important. And I'm sure in your organizations, I'm sure this has never happened to you before, but salespeople always try to find a way to circumvent the process. Right? They're always trying to say, "Oh, gee, but my customer is different, and the stuff you built for me here, it doesn't really work because they're different." And it's important to push back with sales management. It's important to push back as champions of this project to say, tell me why it's different. Tell me why you're doing things differently, because everything has to pass through this. We have to get to this mark. So we're moving the needle, and I literally, it's become a habit to me to check the newspaper for news, and it's to check the enablement rates on Apttus. That's the next one I look at. The metric is, oh, gee, 100 contracts today, 200 contracts, 300, 400. So the good news is the numbers are increasing, and increasing fast. So that's the good news. The bad news is there still are some stragglers out there that are still trying to get special dispensation to move stuff out of the system. So that's something you got to watch out for. And you got to try all the tips and tricks you can to get people to use the system. The carrot, the stick, the hot dog, the cappuccino, whatever works, you got to get them to use the system. That's super beneficial to everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Gautam now because it's been a while. Hopefully you can hear him.
I'm back awake yet. So this is kind of our ending slide, right? So what, right? So this is our so what slide. So we did all this journey, we did all this business transformation. So what, right? So where we are, right? So if you look at this pyramid, right, so Fitch Ratings, with their CLM implementation and kind of the next steps that they're taking beyond that, right, there is an increasing ROI that they are now able to actually get out of this particular implementation, right? So from being able to now have contracts in one single place, be able to get there on time, it's all digitized, sitting out there, so one place, one single source of truth, to now mining that data that's available with the use of Apttus CLM tools that's out there and being able to take that data, use it for compliance reporting, use it for SEC reporting, use it for internal reporting, for financial reporting, and everything and anything that the compliance needs in between. Right, so all that is now available, right? It's all standard reports that they can generate and be able to produce that data really, really quickly. Now, from a legal perspective and from a sales rep perspective, one of the things that they hate the most is actually writing up those contracts. We love reading them, we don't like authoring them, right? So with this Apttus CLM tool coming in and the X-author functionality that's out there, not only legal, but even the sales reps that are out there in the field are able to actually create those contracts pretty quickly, get the right set of legal approvals, make sure that from a system perspective we have the right audit trail behind that of what they're doing and what they shouldn't be doing and are doing. All that is now available there. And the negotiation back and forth with the customer, right? It's now easy because now we have that X-author powerful tool, simple change and deletion and editing of clauses and documents and things like that. So we have all those capabilities there, right? So from a Fitch perspective, we have done all three, right? It's now there, it's now live, it's up and running, people are using it. So where do we go next from here is, I think in the last slide you saw there is a phase 2 we're talking about, which is the integration. Very early on in this session I talked about the integration into the back office systems, right? So that's where we are heading next. We wanted to get the sales user, the compliance, the legal part covered first, because that was the most pressing issue, especially when you have SEC and ESMA breathing down your neck. So we wanted to get that thing going first, and now we are, to take advantage of this powerful tool that's out there. The next leap is going to be integrations, and we've all seen the Apttus Intelligent Cloud and the intelligence that's out there. I think that's kind of on the roadmap from a Fitch perspective of what they want to do with this tool in the next iteration, right? So we're getting there. We're, it's up and live. So from an ROI perspective, we're seeing those results. Our sales reps, the legal teams, the compliance team, they're getting the right set of data that's out there. And to me personally, right, having been done Apttus implementation for so long, to me the biggest key for any successful implementation is data accuracy, right? From left to right, from right to left. If I'm able to get the data right, without manual intervention, let the system flow it down, and that becomes a single source of truth for all your data. That, to me, is the single biggest achievement that you will get from a journey like this. So I'm going to hand it over to Ranjit.
Yep. So here's the money slide. I hope you guys can hear me. And thanks for sitting through this. Appreciate it. It must have been hard. First and foremost is really aligning your stakeholders together, because we have people in compliance, we have people in sales. Think of it like if you guys ever watched Jungle Book or any of those movies, it's like getting hyenas, panthers, zebras, gazelles, people that are normally predatory, all coming together at the watering hole and having a conversation about a project. They're natural enemies. Sales doesn't like to work with legal because they like to go around them. Compliance, nobody likes to talk to, but they're necessary evil. So that's important to get them together at the watering hole and say, guys, we're all working for the common good here. So that's super important, is to get them all lined up and say why this is important, explain to the salespeople why compliance is important, explain to the compliance people why money is important, because yes, we need to have a business. The second part is, and I think we didn't spend a lot of time on this, unfortunately, at Fitch, is change management and telling the salespeople how much their lives were going to change with an automated system. They're so used to their Excel world and their spreadsheet world and their paper documents and just being able to zip it off to clients without even thinking about it, to going to a system where you start with a quote. Nothing start with the quote in Salesforce, or an opportunity in Salesforce. If you don't start there, you're not ending with a contract. So there's a much more connectivity there that wasn't there before. So that's very important to educate to the salespeople that the process is changing. It's not meant to make it more difficult, but in the longer run to make it easier. The third point was executive sponsorship, and this goes without saying, but a lot of times the sales management team, the executive management team sort of bends to the salespeople saying, yeah, I know, but this $1 million contract needs to really get in the door. So they've got to push back and say, no, you will start with the opportunity and then work your way down to the contracts. You will do it that way. And then finally, don't rush into an implementation of Apttus, regardless of whether you're thinking in the 2-week spectrum or the 2-year spectrum. For the record, I think our implementation took about 16 to 18 weeks, roughly, to implement. We started with a lower estimate, about 12 weeks, but here's the other interesting point. As we started on the project, we were told that there would be one person from the business that would manage everybody's requirements, so we would only have to work with one person, not the entire business. Boy, was that a bad idea. So when we get down to user acceptance testing stage, suddenly people from the woodwork are coming out saying, what the hell did you design? This doesn't look like what I use. This is not the way I use it for my business. And no matter how much the executive shouted down, the process changed. So that's what caused this little bump at the end. Luckily, the system was big enough or wide enough to adapt to different needs. But you can't really rely on that one person who the business said, oh, yeah, he's the guy, he's your guy. You know, he's one who's helping you solve these things. So it's important to not just be bottleneck like that, but work with the others in the group and make sure that everybody's bought into this and everybody sees the system not at user acceptance testing time, but way before, so they can raise their voice and be heard or forever hold their peace. You know, so that's another really important point we wanted to make there. I think that was about the main things. We have a few minutes left if anybody has any questions.
Actually, I kind of wanted to end, as I was coming into this door, I actually heard a question, somebody reached out to me and asked them, so how do you design this, right? How do you go about designing this? And my response is, tools are always means to an end. And I take that statement very clearly. Always have the end in mind first. Start from the end and work your way backwards. That's how we designed our systems. When we started with Fitch, right, what we said is, I don't care what you do on your quote. I don't care what you do in a contract. Let's sit down with a contract, think I'm a customer, sell me this contract. How are you going to sell this contract to me, right? How do you want me to sign this? Put yourself in customer's shoes, then tell me what do you need from a customer standpoint, and then work your way backwards. From your customer getting the signature to actually back into the contracts, back into negotiation, back into authoring, back into the quotes, back into the opportunities. So, my advice, having worked with Apttus for so long, is design your systems right to left, never left to right. Right? Because that way you are able to understand the nuances that if you start from a left to right, because you don't have the end in mind, you're going to miss stuff in the middle. So start from your right, work your way backwards, and that's how you design your systems. And then I think the journey becomes easier. And I've seen, working with Fitch, we've been in meetings with a lot of aha moments, right? Where we say, oh, we are doing things a certain way, and then you stand up and say, but it really doesn't impact what your end customer is looking at, so why do you care, right? And then they are able to join the dots and say, yeah, now I get it as to why I don't want to do this a certain way, right? So, that's another takeaway that I wanted to part with is, design your systems right to left. But with that, any questions, anything that we can answer?
Yeah, so we'll give you guys 2 minutes back.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.